We tagged 4 or 5 great white sharks, and one of them in particular, Shark Alpha, was around 9-10 feet in length.
Shark Alpha's tag didn't just record a death, it exposed a contradiction.
She's just a magnificent looking animal. It was only 3 meters long. It didn't have a mark on it. When she first came in, gave us an opportunity to tag her, and he placed his tag perfect.
Every known predator failed to match the data, and as scientists eliminated one explanation after another, an idea long dismissed as impossible crept back into the conversation. What if the predator wasn't misunderstood, but an ancient monster we considered long gone for good? The exact moment Shark Alpha vanished. The last hours of Shark Alpha began in silence, and that silence is what made the event so disturbing. Alpha was not young, weak, or careless. She was a fully grown great white shark, about 9 feet long. She was strong, alert, and experienced. Alpha had spent years moving through the same stretch of ocean near Bremer Canyon, an area studied closely because it is known for deep water and powerful predators. Her tracking tag had followed her for thousands of hours. During all that time, nothing unusual had ever happened. Her movements were steady, her dives were controlled, her body temperature always matched the water around her. She showed no signs of illness, injury, or stress. By every known measure, she was one of the ocean's most capable hunters, moving through familiar territory where she should have been near the top of the food chain. That is what makes what happened next so deeply unsettling. The data first showed a sudden change in speed. Alpha dropped straight down through the water faster than any normal dive ever recorded for a shark of her size. This was not how great whites hunt. They do not plunge straight down at extreme speed. They move with purpose and control. But Alpha's descent was direct, sudden, and violent. The numbers suggested she was not swimming down by choice. It looked like she was being forced downward. Even more alarming was the fact that there were no signs of struggle. The tag did not record sharp turns, sudden stops, or frantic movement. Alpha did not twist or try to escape. Whatever took hold of her did so instantly. Within moments, she passed depths that great white sharks usually avoid. These depths are colder, darker, and dangerous, even for large predators. Still, the data remained smooth and steady. There was no panic response. There was no chase. The event unfolded too fast for fear or defense. It appeared to be over the moment it began. Then came the temperature reading, and this is where the incident crossed into something far more disturbing. The tag suddenly recorded a sharp rise in temperature to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. This made no sense. The surrounding water at that depth was much colder. The warmth did not fade or fluctuate. It stayed constant for hours. That stability ruled out brief exposure to warm water or equipment error. The only known explanation was that the tag, and Alpha with it, were now inside a living body. Internal body temperature in large marine animals stays stable. The data matched that condition exactly. For several hours, the tag recorded the same things over and over again. Darkness, great depth, and steady warmth. There was no movement that suggested swimming. There were no signs of life from Alpha herself. There was only silence, as if the shark had simply been erased from existence. What is just as frightening is what the data did not show. There was no extended pursuit. There were no bursts of speed that would suggest Alpha tried to flee. There were no defensive actions. Great whites are known to react fast and violently when threatened. Alpha did none of that. The data suggests she never had the chance. The predator involved did not need to test her strength or adjust its grip. It did not hesitate. The outcome was decided immediately. Eventually, the tag surfaced alone, but Alpha did not return with it. The tag was damaged in ways that shocked the research team. Its casing was crushed and deeply indented. The pressure marks were smooth, not sharp. There were no tooth marks. Known predators leave clear bite patterns. This damage looked like the tag had been squeezed with overwhelming force. The pressure exceeded what is expected from any animal currently documented in that region. At first, scientists focused only on reconstructing the event. They reviewed depth charts, temperature models, and known predator behavior. They looked for equipment failure. They considered every normal explanation. None fit the facts. A healthy great white does not vanish without a fight. A tracking tag does not experience stable internal warmth unless it is swallowed. Compression damage does not appear without teeth unless the force involved is beyond what teeth are needed for. As these facts settled, the focus shifted. The question was no longer how Alpha disappeared. The question became what could possibly do this. What kind of animal could overpower a fully grown great white instantly, drag it straight down without resistance, contain it whole, and leave behind evidence of crushing force without teeth marks? That question forced researchers to confront the limits of what is known about the ocean and to reconsider assumptions that had stood unchallenged for decades. The theories that failed, one by one. The response from the scientific team was immediate, but methodical. There was no panic and no speculation at first. When something goes wrong at sea, researchers are trained to assume the simplest answer until every basic explanation has been tested and destroyed by evidence. That process began the moment Shark Alpha vanished. Every known predator, failure, and natural event was placed under harsh review. Nothing was dismissed without proof. The first suspect was the orca. Orcas are intelligent, organized hunters. They are known to kill great white sharks and remove their livers with brutal efficiency. They sit at the top of the marine food web and have the strength to overpower almost anything in the ocean. For a moment, this explanation felt safe, but the data turned against it almost immediately. Orcas must return to the surface to breathe. Alpha's tag showed no upward movement at any point after the descent began. Hours passed with no ascent. That alone made orcas unlikely. Then the movement data finished the job. Orca attacks are violent and chaotic. They involve sudden changes in depth, sharp turns, and clear signs of struggle. Alpha's data showed none of this. Her movement was smooth, direct, and silent. There was no fight. Attention then shifted to giant squid. These animals live in deep water and are capable of grabbing and holding large prey. Their size and strength make them a tempting explanation when something disappears below the surface. But this idea collapsed under one critical fact. Squid are cold-blooded animals. Their body temperature matches the surrounding water. They cannot create heat. They cannot hold a stable, warm environment inside their bodies. The tag's reading of 78 degrees for hours made this explanation impossible. Next came the possibility of equipment failure. Scientists never trust a single data point without question. Sensors can break, signals can glitch, but the tag told a clean story. Every system worked before the incident. Every system worked after. Depth, temperature, and time all lined up perfectly. There were no corrupted files, no sudden resets, no gaps. The technology did its job. Scavenging was also considered. Perhaps Alpha had died from an unknown cause and was eaten later, but the data showed she was alive when the descent began. Her movements were controlled. Her speed increased suddenly. Scavengers do not drag healthy animals straight down at extreme speed. They do not create clean vertical drops. They do not act with precision. Environmental explanations were reviewed next. Underwater landslides can pull animals downward. Thermal vents can create heat. Pressure events can damage equipment. But Bremer Canyon is one of the most studied regions in that area. No seismic activity was recorded. No heat vents were present at that location. Nothing in the environment matched the timing or the readings. One by one, each explanation failed. With every failure, the list of possibilities grew smaller. Whatever happened to Shark Alpha had to meet 4 conditions at the same time. It had to overpower a full-grown great white instantly. It had to control the encounter without struggle. It had to operate comfortably at extreme depth. And it had to maintain strong internal heat for hours. Very few known animals even come close to meeting those conditions. By the end of the analysis, scientists still had no answer. But they had reached a hard limit. The event could no longer be explained by known predators, known technology failures, or known environmental forces. The rules they relied on had stopped working, and beyond that point waited an explanation no one wanted to confront, yet one that refused to disappear because the data kept pointing straight toward it. The Great White Cannibal Theory, and why it broke down. The idea that another great white shark was responsible spread quickly and took hold because it felt safe. It stayed inside known biology. It did not challenge accepted science. Great whites are known to eat smaller sharks. They can generate heat in their stomachs after feeding. They are capable of deep dives once they have prey inside them. To the public and to funding bodies, the explanation sounded reasonable. It gave closure without opening doors no one wanted to look through. But behind closed doors, the story began to fall apart. The first problem was size. Shark Alpha was not young and not small. She was a full-grown 9-foot great white with years of survival behind her. Known cases of cannibalism among great whites almost always involve juveniles or weakened animals. Those encounters are messy and violent. They leave clear signs of struggle. There are repeated bite marks. There is blood loss. There is erratic movement as the victim tries to escape. Alpha's data showed none of this. Her descent was clean and straight. There was no spiraling. There was no drawn-out fight. The numbers suggested she was taken whole, not torn apart. No documented great white is capable of swallowing another shark of that size intact. Then came the temperature issue. Great white sharks do have warm stomachs, but that warmth is unstable. It rises during digestion and drops as heat escapes into the surrounding water. Alpha's tag showed no such changes. The temperature stayed steady for hours. That level of thermal stability requires a much larger body mass. It requires insulation and volume far beyond what another great white could provide. This was not the heat of digestion, it was the heat of containment. Behavior raised even more concerns. When two apex predators meet, there is always hesitation. There is assessment. They circle. They test each other's size and strength. Even when one dominates, the other reacts. But Alpha did not react at all. There was no evasive movement, no attempt to flee, no defensive turn. The encounter looked less like a fight and more like an instant shutdown. That kind of dominance suggests a hierarchy so extreme that resistance was meaningless. Ecology delivered the final blow. If a great white large enough to kill Alpha lived in those waters, the entire region would respond. Sharks would avoid the area. Tagged animals would change their routes. Hunting patterns would shift. None of that happened. The ecosystem remained calm. Life moved on, as if nothing unusual had occurred. That suggested the predator was not a resident. It was either rare, passing through, or operating at a level below normal observation. In public reports, the Great White Theory remained the official explanation. It closed the case neatly. However, in private discussions, researchers admitted the truth. The theory only worked if the most critical data points were ignored. But when those details were taken seriously, the explanation collapsed. And once it collapsed, attention moved in a direction no one was comfortable naming out loud, toward a predator that science had placed firmly in the past, toward an ancient monster believed to be long gone for millions of years. The Megalodon hypothesis, and the data that revived it. When the word Megalodon surfaced during closed discussions, the tone of the investigation changed immediately. The room did not erupt into excitement. It went quiet. That name carried weight, risk, and professional danger. Still, the data demanded another look. Scientists asked questions they had never allowed themselves to ask before. What if the accepted limits on size were wrong? What if extinction timelines were based on absence of evidence rather than proof of absence? What if something enormous had simply learned to stay out of sight? With those questions on the table, researchers rebuilt their models from the ground up. They removed the upper size limits that had been baked into modern shark biology. They allowed for a predator far larger than any living shark. As soon as those constraints were lifted, the numbers began to settle. The strange readings that once looked impossible now fit cleanly. Alpha's rapid descent no longer required force beyond imagination. The stable internal temperature no longer looked like an error, it looked expected. Attention then turned to sonar data collected over decades. Deep ocean surveys often record strange returns that do not match known animals or terrain. These readings are usually labeled as noise or unknown biological mass and archived without follow-up. But when these files were reprocessed with new assumptions, patterns emerged. Massive moving bodies appeared on screen. They were too large to be sharks known today. They moved too fast and too directly to be whales. Their motion showed strong vertical control, not slow drifting. They did not surface. They did not remain in shallow water. They appeared briefly, moved with intent, and vanished into deep trenches where tracking equipment could not follow. The behavior was unsettling. These were not lost animals or random anomalies. They acted with purpose. Their depth changes suggested extreme power and efficiency. Nothing in modern marine biology matched that profile. Old records were pulled next. Researchers reviewed photographs and reports of whale carcasses recovered over the years. Many wounds had been attributed to orcas by default. But when measured carefully, some bite marks told a different story. The spacing between impressions was too wide. The curve of the wounds was too shallow. Orca jaws could not account for the scale. When these marks were compared to reconstructed models of Megalodon jaws, the alignment was precise. Not close, not suggestive, precise. More evidence came from damaged equipment, tracking tags, deep water probes, small submersible housings recovered with unexplained crushing damage. In the past, these marks had been blamed on pressure or collisions. But pressure damage leaves uniform stress patterns. These ones did not. They showed localized compression, focused force. When engineers calculated the amount of strength required to create those marks, the numbers exceeded the bite force of any living marine animal. Only one theoretical predator matched those forces, a shark the size of a bus or larger. None of this proved that Megalodon still existed. No remains were recovered, no clear image was captured. Science could not make that leap. But something critical changed. The idea stopped being impossible. It stopped breaking the rules of physics and biology. Instead, it followed them. The Megalodon hypothesis did not fight the data, it organized it. That shift was deeply uncomfortable. Once a theory fits too well, it becomes dangerous. It forces questions that have consequences, such as funding, reputation, and public reaction. And as confidence in the models grew, researchers started noticing a more troubling pattern. Patterns in the deep that only one predator explains. When Shark Alpha's disappearance was placed beside other unexplained tracking losses, a pattern began to surface that could no longer be ignored. These events were not scattered randomly across the ocean. They clustered around very specific locations: deep-sea canyons, the edges of continental shelves, areas where shallow hunting grounds drop suddenly into black water thousands of feet deep. These locations are not just deep, they are ideal ambush zones. Prey gathers near the shelf where food is plentiful. Below that shelf is darkness, pressure, and open space. For a massive predator that relies on surprise and power, there is no better hunting ground. As more cases were added to the map, the shape of the pattern became clearer. These were not frequent attacks. They were rare, isolated, separated by long stretches of time. That rarity had once been used to dismiss them. Now it looked intentional. Fossil evidence suggests that a predator the size of a megalodon would not need to hunt often. Its energy demands could be met by a single enormous kill. After feeding, it could remain inactive for weeks. That feeding style would leave almost no trace. It would create exactly what researchers had been seeing for decades: a few disappearances, long gaps, no obvious disturbance. This explained why surface ecosystems appeared unaffected. A predator operating at extreme depth would not compete with modern sharks or whales. It would not change migration routes near the surface. It would feed below them, in places where bodies sink and evidence vanishes. The ocean would look calm because the violence would be happening far beneath it. Additional support came from deep-sea scans that had been quietly archived for years. Some sediment surveys showed massive gouges carved into the seafloor. These marks were long, curved, and shaped like enormous teeth. At the time, they were labeled as unusual geological formations. But when measured and compared, the spacing between the gouges did not match rock movement or current flow. The repetition suggested contact. There was pressure and motion. When scaled against the teeth of modern sharks, the marks were far too large. But when scaled against reconstructed megalodon teeth, they fit. No living animal known today leaves marks like that at those depths. What made Shark Alpha's case different was clarity. Most past incidents lacked clean data. Tags failed suddenly. Signals vanished without warning. In Alpha's case, everything was recorded: her speed, her depth, her temperature, the silence that followed. It was one of the few moments where modern technology stayed active long enough to witness the start of the event. That data removed guesswork. It showed force beyond struggle, heat beyond the environment, control beyond competition. Alpha did not flee. She did not fight. She did not even react. That absence of response was the most frightening detail of all. It suggested an encounter so one-sided that instinct never had time to engage, a predator so dominant that resistance was meaningless. By the time researchers reached this stage, the question was no longer, is this possible? It had quietly become, how many times has this happened before? The implication that rewrites ocean history. If a predator like Megalodon still exists, the consequences stretch far beyond the disappearance of one tracked shark. It would force a complete rethinking of what extinction in the ocean truly means. On land, extinction is visible. Bones are found. Habitats are emptied. But in the deepness of the ocean, disappearance can mean something very different. It can mean retreat into depth. It can mean survival in places humans almost never reach and rarely observe for long. This idea is not speculative. It is already supported by history. The coelacanth vanished from the fossil record for 66 million years. Entire generations of scientists believed it was gone forever. Then, it was found alive, unchanged, living in deep, stable waters where sunlight barely reaches. The animal had not failed to survive. It had simply escaped notice. The same pattern followed the giant squid. For centuries, it existed only in stories. It was labeled a myth because no one had ever seen it alive. But when it was finally filmed, it was exactly where skeptics had never seriously looked, in deep water with extreme pressure and total darkness. Other examples reinforce the pattern. Frilled sharks, six-gill sharks, sleeper sharks, and goblin sharks all display ancient traits once thought incompatible with modern oceans. They persist because deep environments change slowly and reward size, patience, and low-energy movement. These animals are not rare because they are weak. They are rare because they are hidden. If Megalodon survived, it would fit cleanly into this pattern. It would not patrol coastlines or surface waters. It would not compete with modern sharks or whales. It would exist far below them, feeding infrequently and leaving little evidence behind. The deep ocean would protect it not through isolation alone, but through invisibility. The ocean is not empty just because it is quiet. It is not conquered. It remains vast, dark, and largely untouched by observation. If something ancient still moves below, it does not need recognition to survive. It does not need belief. It only needs depth, darkness, and silence. Make sure to click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos.